Hello everyone! Welcome back to another episode of React Developer Log, where I show you how I built from scratch a web app for a hawker center. Let's do a little recap here. In Spring 0, which is the planning phase, I did some planning on the methodology that I will use to approach this project, the tag that I will adopt for developing this mobile responsive web app, and I also show the wireframe of the different pages that I'll be building and how I have allocated it into different sprints. What I did not show is what each sprint entails, which we will be covering today, the sprint schedule. So as you can see from my mouse here, in sprint 1 to 3, I will be developing the front end. By front end, I mean the user interface, which is the pages. So you can see from 1 to 3, there is setup page, there's the home page, the join us, the contact us, the store directory, and the specific store page. At the end of the sprint 3, which is the most challenging one, besides having this store directory and clicking into it will direct us to its individual specific store page, I will, at the start of sprint 4, connect this front end to the back end. And eventually, in sprint 5, when everything is done, I will host it on cloud and it will go live. Before that, I will do some touching up. Before I proceed, I would like to highly recommend this group of people to watch my video, this React Developer Log. The first group will be those who are not interested in coding but want to explore working in the tech industry, either in a non-tech role or such as a project manager. Why I recommend so is because through my React Developer Log, I hope you all can gain a better understanding of the methodology, the process, the terminology, especially those that is commonly used in Agile, and you can use it as a stepping stone to learn further things. The second group of users who I highly recommend to watch my React Developer Log is those who are totally new to coding or are in the midst of learning. I feel that web development is a good starting point for them, because for web development, you can start off with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML by itself is a markup language and it's pretty direct and easy to learn. Actually, you could even create a static website with just HTML and CSS alone. You do not need JavaScript. But of course, if you need to add some interaction, that's where JavaScript comes in. So we are developing web, and although React is slightly more advanced, it's still good to watch and have a good feel of what you will gradually learn down the road. For my third group of users is the most obvious one, the most direct ones. They are the React developers and the Backend developers. By Backend developers, I am referring to those who have knowledge of Node.js and or cloud such as Google, Amazon, or Microsoft Azure. Without further ado, let's start off with Sprint 1. Okay, for Sprint 1, we will first start out with what I do first, which is the most common thing that I do is setting up the UI framework. In this project, I'll be using React-Bootstrap. So at the start, I have encountered some issues where when I implement some React-Bootstrap component, I can see part of the features being there, but not all the features are visible, such as the color, even certain interaction, it's not there. So I'm starting to wonder what's the issue. Then I read the official documentation and realized that actually for React-Bootstrap to work fully, I have to import the bootstrap.min, as you can see here. For this case, I import it in the app.js folder, which is what most consider a root folder, and it works for all my components subsequently. The second thing I usually do is to make sure there's a base CSS. CSS means Cascading Style Sheet, for those who are new to it. It's what defines the looks and feel of your web page. So this base CSS main purpose is to set a default setting for all the elements and tags. Some people will have a preference of going more in-depth and even setting a font color to a specific color like black or blue. For me, I'm pretty simple. What I did is just to set the HTML and the body color. What do I mean by HTML and body color? This is the website that I've created. If I zoom out, you could see two different shades of color. So the HTML tag is actually enclosing the body tag. So you can see in my PowerPoint slide, this is actually referring to the gray color. This is actually referring to the white color. Okay, let me zoom back. And now let's go into the homepage itself. With everything set up, let's observe what we have to build. For the homepage, there's 4 components to build. First is the navigation bar from the top. As we go down, we could see a recommendation section which actually consists of carousel, meaning slideshows of pictures. And as we go further down, we can see a promotion section, which is actually a scrollable list of cards. And last but not least is the footer. What we have to know before we start is that React components are actually recyclable and reusable. So as you can see, we have to acknowledge that actually the navigation bar and the footer is shared by all pages. So you can see that it's actually being recycled through all the pages. And these pages are actually components. That's why, if you can see my mouse to the right hand side, how I structure my file, there is a component folder which consists the footer and the home. In all the past project, is what I used as quick reference and copy and paste. And below is all the default app, index, CSS, index.js. The index CSS is actually my base CSS. So the second point I've covered. The third point is what I've also covered, is restoring individual components, and each page actually is own components. So let's delve into the first component, which is the navigation bar. For React app, when you use the npx function of create React app, what you realize is the web app that you create is actually single page. But then in my wireframe, what I realized is that I am required to build a multi-page app. So to do so, I need to use React Router library so that I could render multiple pages and with its own subdomain name as URL. Let me show you the actual site. Then you will know what does it mean by subdomain name as URL. As you can see, when I go to blog, the subdomain, sub URL is actually blog. Go store info, the sub URL is store info and correspond with the content and navbar. This is what I want, a sub URL on top of the main one. And I'm going to use React-Bootstrap navigation bar to replace the unordered list and list items, which is the dot in the router example. So let me jump into my code. So as you can see, I'm using the router library. So here it is. And after importing the router library, I'm used the router tag to enclose the entire thing. After enclosing, this is where I set my link. I define my link. And whenever I'm supposed to go to blog, it will bring me to this blog component, home component. Home component is done already, so you can see I'm importing it. It's actually here to the left hand side. The rest is not done, so I will temporarily nest it under the app.js function first, so I do not need to import it. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint slide. I use React-Bootstrap. So you can see here, I use React-Bootstrap and replace the unordered list, the UL, LI, with navlink. Last but not least, because I'm using React-Bootstrap, it is actually mobile responsive, and hence this navigation bar also become mobile responsive that collapse when you reach a certain size. What do I mean? Let me show you first how to inspect code. As you can see, when you click the inspect function, it will bring you to this page where you can view the code, styles, and even see error code in the console. Now, expand it first to a normal website. So when I gradually decrease the size of my page, you can see that these links, all four collapse into an icon, a hamburger looking icon. And when I click on it, all my navbar links will be presented in the vertical list. When I expand it back, the icon disappeared and the navbar links reappeared. So this is what is termed as collapse. To the next slide. I'm going to jump to the fourth component, which is the footer, because it's also reusable among all pages. And if you notice, I often have a use of footer tags, which is not necessary for cleaner coding and which is clearer to people who will be reading my code. So I will show you here first, to my home. Footer. So what this do is, it will return a footer at the end. So at the end, I will have a parent component of footer tags, which enclose its own content here, container. This is unnecessary but it is for the betterment of the person who will be reading your code. And if you notice in the footer, it is clearly structured such that the follow us with its icon is on the right, and on the left you have the foot center name and a bunch of links. So to structure it in such a way, you could imagine an invisible table with two columns. The first column will be separating these followers to the right, and the second column is actually made up of two rows, which is ABC brickwork foot center, one row, and within the second row there is a sub column. So let's jump into the code first. So you can see two rows, one row first, two columns. So the first column will have multiple rows and sub columns, as you can see here. ABC brickwork, ABC brickwork foot center. Then you'll have its own columns which are individually spaced, equally spaced, in column of 4, a proportion of 4. So in this case, with grid layout, I am able to structure it as to however I want it. Do take note that you have to wrap your row and column in a container. And do also take note that this grid layout can segment up to 12 columns. And last but not least, now we are in the third component, which is the recommendation segment. So for this recommendation section, I'm using React-Bootstrap grid layout to also segment the thing. In this case, I have 3 rows. So I will show you. Three rows for recommendation, dish store, and others that I've enjoyed. Then in the third row, I will insert a carousel item, a carousel bootstrap component. And I did some minor tweaking with the CSS text align, so this thing will be centralized. That's what you can see here in my website. Centralized. Okay, so with this recommendation section done, let's move on to the last section, which is the promotion section. As you can see in this promotion section, there is some kind of header here and some description, followed by a horizontal scroll list. So for this horizontal scroll list, in the local React library, there's actually no such inbuilt functions or components. You can only find in community libraries, such as the one I found below, React horizontal scrolling menu. And I've also put down the link and QR code in case you're interested to use it. A good practice of mine is that if I'm not familiar with the thing, I will usually do it from scratch first before I use the community library to understand the logic behind, so that I could improve myself further. So going by this train of thought, I have decided to code from scratch the horizontal scroll list, or what you call horizontal scroll menu. So the general principle behind it is first to churn out the list of cards, which I have, as you can see here, a JSON array of objects that contain all the ID, title, description, and the link to the pictures, which are stored in the public library. So with the map function, I will be able to churn out a list of the card. However, this list by default is vertical. And as you can see here, these cards are all horizontal. So what do? I play around with the CSS using Flexbox. By turning the display to flex, it will become horizontal. What I need to do next is to ensure that the size of the card is the same, so that even if you have image of different size, text area of different length, it will not affect how the card looks. The card will be of the consistent width and height. So that's why I specified my card width and height, and it's the image and the text area. And last but not least, I add a finishing touch, which is called the hover effect. As you can see here. So from my actual site, you can see that I have a horizontal scroll list. If I go to the respective promotion item, there will be a magnification of the respective card items. This is what you call the hover effect, and to finalize and finish up this horizontal scroll list, I do more tweaking with the CSS, such that I play around with the image to make sure it's contained within. I also need to create a div tag to act as a container for the flex object, so that the horizontal scroll will appear. And last but not least, I also play around with the width of the card, as you can see here also, which I mentioned previously. With that in place, I do note that the wireframe has a border that surrounds it. However, by default, the border is rectangular. So to make a circular edge, I need to play around with the radius. So I play around with the border radius. And not only that, in the wireframe, the title is also highlighted. So to make sure that the title in my actual product is highlighted, I need to also give it color, background color. Let's go to the CSS style sheet. Yep. And after defining the background color, I also need to make sure that this thing is circular. So likewise, I define the border radius, and I also define width so that it does not cover the entire thing. So let's look through first. Promo card, promo image, promo card container. And above it, so this is the parent container, which I play around with the border radius to give it a circular black radius. And what I was referring to was the title, which is H3, header 3 of the promotion. I give it a lemon chiffon and I define the border radius on the left side, and I set the width so that it don't stretch to the whole of it. What happens if I remove the width? Let's try. Remember to save, and if you reload, or you don't even have to reload, we'll cover the entire segment. So I do not want that. Yep. So it will be very similar to how it is supposed to look in the wireframe. That's all for Spring 1. I hope you enjoy and learn some meaningful things from my sharings. Stay tuned to Spring 2, where I'll cover Join Us and Contact Us page. Meanwhile, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel below. Thank you!